The end of Saul and Jonathan. In our last story, we learned about David's fractured identity among the Philistines. He played the part of loyal servant to Achish, the Philistine king, but was still loyal to Israel at heart. When the Amalekites raid David's town and steal all their families, David's heroic spirit is rekindled, and he mounts a rescue mission. In this story, we learn about the death of Saul and Jonathan, inspired by the book of 1 Samuel and 1 Chronicles. The battle raged on violently. Steel clashed against steel, and the men of Israel were choked under the weight of the Philistine horde. Jonathan fought alongside his brothers. Jonathan's sword flew through the battle. His strength was inspiring, but waning. His brothers had fallen, but Jonathan pressed on. 2 Philistines came towards him. He ran towards one, dodged his advance, and drove his sword into his back. He delivered a blow to the shield of the other Philistine, but he parried with a swing to Jonathan's left calf. Jonathan wailed in pain and knelt to the floor. Then, with one swoop, the Philistine stood and struck Jonathan's chest. Jonathan knelt there holding his chest, and the Philistine delivered a second blow, driving the sword into him. Jonathan lay in the dirt of the battlefield, choking on his own blood, until eventually breathing his last to be with his God. The battle pressed on, and Saul was fighting behind the battle with his back to the valley for easy escape. Saul struck down a Philistine and knelt down behind a crack in the canyon to catch his breath, but the archers could see him. From a distance, a Philistine archer drew his bow and released an arrow through the sky, a direct hit into Saul's abdomen. Saul writhed in pain on the floor. His armor-bearer, who was fighting beside him, knelt over him, trying to stop the bleeding. Saul's eyes were glazing over in pain, and his breathing became miserable. Saul grabbed his armor-bearer by the tunic and said, "Draw your sword and kill me now, lest I die by these worthless Philistines. They will capture me and shame me." But his armor-bearer could not kill his king. He would not. Saul let him go, and the armor-bearer ran away. Saul turned onto his side and looked at the battle. The men of Israel fought valiantly. Everything began to blur for Saul as he propped himself up with a boulder and drew his sword. Saul's heavy breathing began to slow, and he thought of all he had done in his life until that point. He remembered his journey to find his father's donkeys, his meal with Samuel, and his first victory in battle. Oh, how the people loved him back then, back when he had the Spirit of God guiding his every step. Tears fell from Saul's eyes as he clenched his sword in his right hand. Saul raised his sword towards him, and with a final push, fell onto his blade. The dead king lay there motionless on the floor of the battlefield. Dirt and blood covered him as the Philistines began to overtake the entire army. When the men of Israel saw that Saul and his sons had perished along with all the other soldiers, they fled. So the Philistines sauntered into the cities of Israel and lived among them. They cut up Saul and Jonathan's bodies and mounted them in the land of the Philistines as a symbol of victory. A few brave men stole away the body parts and buried them in Jabesh, but the Philistines still had power over much of Israel. Israel once again found themselves under the boot of another evil nation, yet God would not abandon them. As he had every time before, God would send a hero, a man of bravery, wisdom, and purity of heart. David, a shepherd from the town of Bethlehem, would rise up as a savior to the oppressed and enslaved people, an image that would echo throughout all history.